Since the early 2000s, Disney has been trying everything in their power to recapture the magic of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. With numerous failed attempts at a new film franchise, they accidentally created a new subgenre of films in the process. A subgenre I like to call the failed next big thing. These are movies that Disney dumped tons of money into making, but more often than not, they failed both at the box office and with critics. 2018's A Wrinkle in Time is yet another example of this type of film. So in this video, I want to examine this movie to see what went wrong, and offer some of my theories on why this film failed to launch the franchise it was supposed to. The story of 2018's A Wrinkle in Time starts all the way back in 2010, when Walt Disney Pictures retained the rights to the popular 1962 novel of the same name by Madeleine L'Engle. The story follows 13-year-old Meg Murray as she embarks on a journey across space and time to save her father. It is the first installment into a series of 5 books set in this world, which is known as the Time Quintet. Disney had previously made a TV adaptation of this book back in 2003. However, following the success of some of their other book adaptations like The Bridge to Terabithia and The Chronicles of Narnia, Disney became hungry for more classic young adult novels to adapt. They were really following in the footsteps with Bridge to Terabithia, as they hired the original screenwriter of that film, Jeff Stockwell, to write a screenplay for A Wrinkle in Time. Originally, Disney was shooting for a smaller budget range of $35 million. Comparing it to Bridge to Terabithia, which was made on a budget of $25 million. However, over the next couple of years, the company steered away from this approach and decided to prop up the series as one of their next big tentpole films. In 2014, Disney hired Frozen director Jennifer Lee to write a new draft of Stockwell's original script, and 2 years later, Ava DuVernay was attached to direct the film. Later, in 2016, Storm Reid was cast as the lead role of Meg Murray, while the rest of the cast was filled with the talents of Oprah Winfrey, Reese Witherspoon, Mindy Kaling, Chris Pine, and Zach Galifianakis.
You get a poster! And you get a poster!
Principal photography kicked off in November of 2016, shooting primarily in LA. As you can probably tell, a large portion of this movie was shot in the studio. Later on, production was moved to New Zealand for some on-location shooting, where the film wrapped in early 2017. At the end of production, the total budget of the film was estimated somewhere between $100 to $130 million. And according to Forbes, at least another $100 million was spent on marketing and distribution. If you also factor in that movie theaters take around 40 to 50% of each ticket sold, that means going off the lowest possible estimate, A Wrinkle in Time would need to make at least $280 million at the box office in order to break even. In its opening weekend, A Wrinkle in Time debuted at number 2 in the box office, right behind Black Panther, which was on its 4th week at the number 1 spot. A Wrinkle in Time made $33 million in its first weekend, and went on to make $100 million in the US and $32 million overseas, for a total worldwide gross of $132 million, which is far from what it needed in order to break even. In fact, The Hollywood Reporter calculated the film's net loss at $130 million, which made it the second biggest box office bomb of 2018, right behind Mortal Engines. So, it wasn't even the best at being the worst. The reviews showed a similar disappointing reaction. IMDb, Metacritic, and Rotten Tomatoes all have the film in the 50s to 40s, and the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is even worse at 26%. So this mega-budget fantasy sci-fi epic based on a beloved novel with an award-winning director and writer with a star-studded cast still failed to make its money back and totally missed with fans and critics. But why? Why did it fail? The poor word of mouth and poor reviews are the biggest factors on why this film failed, but there's several more factors at play that I want to explore. This movie gets compared to Tomorrowland a lot, and for good reason, as they both share a lot of the same qualities which represent why they both failed to leave an impression with a lot of people. Both movies try to tackle very serious issues, but shy away from stating anything important so they don't ruffle too many feathers, and end up with very vague messages. Additionally, both films are too focused on the spectacle rather than the story, which is a problem you also see in the marketing. Just like the film itself, the marketing was focused on highlighting the cool imagery rather than conveying what the film might be about. This is very similar to why Tomorrowland's marketing failed, as Tomorrowland's trailers were confusing and focused more on the setting rather than the plot or characters. Both films took the mysterious route when it took to teasing the film, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. It worked for the teaser trailer of A Wrinkle in Time, since teaser trailers are meant to be mysterious, But for the actual trailer, it didn't work for a lot of people as they were expecting something more. Another reason why this film failed is that they were trying to attract a younger audience instead of a wider one. Pixar movies have a reputation of being successful because they cater to both kids and parents. They are called family movies because both demographics can find aspects to love in the movie. A Wrinkle in Time is too much of a kids movie and doesn't really offer anything of substance for the adults in the theaters to enjoy. There's a lot of people online who will say this movie failed because it has a diverse cast, or that general audiences aren't ready for a blockbuster that stars women and people of color. Personally, I don't subscribe to these theories. Representation is important in cinema. It's just a shame that it often turns into a political debate and gets blamed for why a movie fails or succeeds. In 2017 and 2018, we saw two huge movies that dominated at the box office and with critics and with fans that proudly featured women and people of color, those being Wonder Woman and Black Panther. In fact, as we discussed earlier, Black Panther was so successful that it was still at the top of the box office when A Wrinkle in Time first debuted. And this could be another reason why A Wrinkle in Time underperformed, as Disney sabotaged themselves by placing it so close to Black Panther. They underestimated how big of a hit Black Panther would be and failed to put enough spacing in between their big releases. My personal hypothesis is that Disney sealed this movie's fate when they made the decision to turn it into a big budget tentpole franchise starter, rather than have it be a smaller budget family film, like they had originally planned when they mapped it after Bridge to Terabithia. I think if they would have stuck with that original plan, it could have had a chance to be successful. I don't think A Wrinkle in Time was a big enough IP to gamble such a large amount of money on. Yes, the book is super popular and influential, but I don't think it has the same pop culture relevance it does today as it did back when it first came out in the 60s. It's not Harry Potter level popular in the modern age, yet Disney still gave it Harry Potter level money. There's two novel-turned film franchises that made the successful leap from page to screen that I wanted to point out, that I think Disney should have modeled this movie after, those being The Maze Runner and Twilight. Now hear me out before you attack me for praising Twilight. Both the first Maze Runner and first Twilight only had a budget of around $35 million. So even if the films failed, it wouldn't have been too big of a loss for the companies. Both these films made over $300 million, and once these companies knew the properties were a success, then the sequels got those established IP budgets. A Wrinkle in Time came right out of the gate with that established IP budget, when they should have tested the waters first with a smaller budget, and then graduated to that $100 million once it proved itself. You could have made 3 Twilights for the price of 1 Wrinkle in Time. The reality is, in modern Hollywood, it's hard to kickstart a new franchise that is based on an untested IP. We've learned that time and time again, from John Carter to Tomorrowland to A Wrinkle in Time. But of course, to reiterate, the film failed because it just wasn't very good. Back in middle school, we read this book in English class, and all I remember is that I didn't like it. And after seeing the movie, I gotta say, I still don't like it. First, let me say what I liked about the film. The movie has good intentions and it has heart. I could see how it could be very inspiring to some viewers. And as per usual, Chris Pine puts in a great performance. That's what I like about actors like Chris Pine. No matter what movie they are in, they put in the effort. Storm Reid also had a pretty solid performance as the main character. It's just a shame that the script is kind of lacking, so she isn't given a lot of great material to work with. Additionally, the score is pretty solid. But beyond those aspects, there's not much in this film that I liked. I have 2 words that best describe this movie, and they are underwhelming and boring. This movie puts on the mask like it's dazzling and introspective, but in reality it's very surface level and bland, both with its messages and with its visuals. It's very much style over substance. Let's start off with the visuals. The film gives off the impression that it's this adventure through space and time, and they are visiting all these interesting locations and planets. But none of these locations have any character to them, and they all feel so empty. So many crucial scenes happen in a vacant white room or an empty dark hallway where it just feels inauthentic and the audience is painfully aware that the actors are on a soundstage. I get that this is the aesthetic that the filmmakers are going for, but it totally strips the film of any wonder and imagination, which is what this movie desperately needed. It's showing all these visuals and trying to make us believe that they are awe-inspiring, but in reality, they're not. Everything kind of blends together in a mess, and it leaves you feeling very unsatisfied. It doesn't help that they just have way too many close-ups of the characters. Like, we rarely get any wide shots of all our characters, and each scene is shot with individual close-ups, so it feels like none of the actors were with each other when shooting their scenes. It's just an odd choice by the cinematographer. And then there's the messages and themes of the film. Just like the visuals, they are trying to convince you that what they are saying is deep and important, but in reality, what they're saying is just so on the nose and lacks any nuance. The film is practically hitting you over the head every other scene on the theme of self-realization and embracing your flaws, that it feels like the movie is talking down on you. And that's one of my biggest movie pet peeves, when a movie treats the audience like they're stupid just because they're young. Kids can understand nuance. You don't have to spell out every single message that you're trying to portray, and restate it in every other scene. This is why I pointed out earlier that this movie feels more like a kid's movie than a family movie. And then there's the main villain of the movie. I shouldn't even say villain, because it wasn't even a character at all, more of an idea. It is basically just the general concept of evil, which could work if properly used. But this film, of course, fumbles it. I know that this is what it is in the book, but I remember it in the book being way more interesting. The climax of the film devolves into this battle between good and evil, and the main takeaway is that love is good and hate is bad. It's just so underwhelming. Like, is that really the best you could do? Not only does the movie do this with the themes of the story, but it also does it with the exposition. The exposition in this movie is so clunky. I swear they repeat the fact that Meg's dad is missing like 10 times in the first 15 minutes of the movie. The characters are also pretty boring and forgettable. The most confusing one to me was Calvin, because he basically did nothing and had no impact on the plot. I get that he helped further Meg's character arc, but I kept expecting him to have a big character moment where he might get to save the day or do something interesting. But by the end of the film, I realized he did nothing the entire movie. I really liked some of Ava DuVernay's other films, so I don't know what happened here. Maybe it was a byproduct of working for the House of Mouse. I feel like some directors can make the jump to big studio films better than others. It has good intentions and it has heart, but it goes about telling its story and themes in such an uninspired and boring fashion. A Wrinkle in Time is a movie that bit off more than it could chew. Disney made the decision to turn this into a big budget tentpole film, and it ended up with no money and no sequel. If they wanted to turn this into a franchise, they should have been more realistic with the budget. The movie came off as very simple, very boring, and an underwhelming mess. So that's the story of A Wrinkle in Time, Disney's failed next big thing. But what are your thoughts on the film? Do you think this franchise could have had potential? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked the video, make sure to check out the others in the series and maybe even subscribe. This has been Tom from Eisenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.